Welcome, everybody, to The Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. The topic for today is the mythical story and the mythical archetype. And before we dive in, I'm going to tell you a story that, changed my life. When I was 6 years old, was the first time my parents took me to the cinema. In itself, it was an experience, just going and having that. But the movie I saw was Star Wars. It was The Return of the Jedi. And, first I saw the monsters, I saw Jabba's palace, I saw everything that was happening there. But later, I saw a scene that really changed my life. It was the Sarlacc scene, and this was my hero that's just become my hero. Luke Skywalker had just been delivered from the Rancor, and had survived that, and now he was going to be executed with his friends. And they take him to the Sarlacc, and I see him, typical pirate scene, about to be thrown into the mouth of I don't know what that was, but it was a hole in the ground, a pit. So I was really intrigued of what was going to happen. And I remember him being very defiant and saying, "Jabba, this is your last chance. Free us or die." And they start laughing. And suddenly he raises his hands and makes a gesture to his companion, R2-D2. Before that time, I had never seen a lightsaber. So imagine the impact of when suddenly they try to put him in. He turns around, catches the plank, just jumps in the air, flips over, catches the lightsaber, and frankly starts kicking butt. That really changed my life. The moment there really marked me. From then on, I started living in those realities, in that myth, in those stories. Every day that I woke up, it was, trying to be Luke Skywalker, trying to save the galaxy, trying to fight the evil empire and do all that. And so our story or our topic is going to be focused on the mythical story and the mythical archetypes. The program of The Divine Within focuses on the importance and the impact of archetypes and myth in human civilization. This segment and this version is, that we're talking about. Regardless of the West and the East, poor or rich, even religions, there is a common thread among all the cultures on the earth. The same stories are repeated, maybe not the same characters, but they are, in essence, the same. This is what Joseph Campbell demonstrated in his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. This is the main work that inspired George Lucas into creating Star Wars, the ultimate mythical story. And why is that? Why is Star Wars the ultimate myth? Because it was so beautifully created that it allows for endless stories to be told. It contains endless heroes, villains, lessons, and most importantly, meaning. It takes us to a galaxy far, far away, and curiously integrating the different cultures of the Earth into a galactic mosaic, without restricting it to a simple culture. It also takes a space opera that integrates a religious aspect, so intelligently designed that we don't even notice. Lucas was able to introduce the Force as a fundamental source, a controller and upholder of everything that exists, without putting a face to it. In essence, taking away personality and leaving God as a raw and all-encompassing force that integrates both the light and the dark, making it absolute. I personally believe that my generation, Generation X, was the first generation to collectively discard institutional religion, a bold move that was needed given the actual state of human evolution. We no longer have to conform to a church. But nevertheless, this doesn't mean that we have to kill the idea of the existence of God. On the contrary, we're given the choice, and it's in us to seek Him. And then we find meaning, we find truths, we find values, and most importantly, we align ourselves with them, and we live our lives by them. And Star Wars, my friend, is our bridge from myth to personal religion. Now, I want to welcome today's guests. This panel is really peppered with very talented story writers, people that have dedicated their lives to creating stories, to these myths, to these archetypes. And I want them to share their personal stories and why they are doing this and what really moves them, and try to, with them, understand what this is all about. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Carrie Bloch. Carrie is a PBS professional, a tea sommelier, and author. She has enjoyed 2 tenures totaling a 30-year career in public television, nonprofit, mission-driven educational television. She is employed by New Orleans PBS station. Her expertise is in corporate partnerships and fundraising with script writing and production skills. She previously owned and operated a family business and internationally styled tea house for 13 years. The Tea Stores continues online. You can check it out at www.theans, mythicalstories.com, and we're going to put that in the comments you're going to see. But most recently, she has enjoyed writing children's books as part of the Spiritual Tea series entitled Lil Vian's Discovers Christmas and Lil Vian Discovers Tea Around the World, which can be found in Amazon. And now she's working on Lil Vian comes to Easter or discovers Easter. Thank you, Carrie, and welcome, Carrie. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. This is really wonderful. I'm enjoying springtime in New Orleans. As you can see, you might hear the birds chirping in the background. I'm very excited about my latest book, Little Vian Discovers Easter. I'm taking a lot of time with it. It's a complex subject, actually, and it's even harder to imagine how a child should perceive this, because it's such a tragic week leading up to the resurrection. And what do we tell children? Do we just tell them that they were very mean to Jesus? What do we say? What details do we give them? But it's from the perspective of the protagonist. Little Vian is a butterfly, an imaginary fantasy butterfly. She's a pink butterfly, like a fly on the wall. So she sees all, and she is able to tell the story. And she has a little friend that she tells stories to. So it's all about the stories. I even like you mentioned, Santi, I work for the PBS station and here in New Orleans, and we even talk about being our region's storyteller. We have discovered over the years that telling stories just really is a way to get a really nice point across. And it is so important in our day and age for us to be able to connect with others when there's so much great technology out there as this. I mean, look at us. This panel is all over the world in all different time zones. This is just amazing. And so happy to be a part of this. But we need to find ways to connect. And you can be having conversation. You can, be in a business meeting, but telling that story will help someone remember and help them to understand the point that you're trying to make. So that's just a little bit. I don't know if you have any specific questions for me, but I'm happy to be a part of this. Thank you.
We're going to have a lot of questions, Carrie, once we dive into the topics. So just you wait. Thank you. Now I'm going to move to Stephen Marble. Well, Stephen, a good friend of mine, is a film veteran, if I may say. He, after completing studies in the film and education at the University of Southern California, UCLA, and Antioch University, Stephen began teaching filmmaking to youth. Founded and ran a private experiential school for students from elementary into high school. He developed film projects, then began a career in special format filmmaking and immersive attraction design and production. The results were the IMAX films Chronos and Sacred Site, as well as the development of concepts for 70mm feature films Baraka and Samsara. After managing and directing the design, development, and production of 2 Back to the Future rides for Universal Studios, he continued designing and building many attractions worldwide, including an UFO experience in China. For the past 23 years, Stephen has worked with his daughter Lyra to develop a successful pumpkin patch and Christmas tree business well known throughout the Los Angeles area. And so if you ever bought or are from the area, you probably know Stephen or you know her as his daughter, because they know the pumpkins and they know the trees. And when Stephen is not working in his seasonal business, he's worked with the Center for Unity and he clears people for places of problematic energies and develops cinematic stories and projects. So welcome, Stephen. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Santiago. It's a great opportunity. I'm thrilled. There's so many things to share, and I'm glad that you're crafting this and giving us some focus, because the universe has a lot to say these days. And I think that's the most important thing, that we're tapping into the universe is tapping into us, and we're in this feedback loop that is escalating into a new era. So I'm thrilled to be here to share this. And the way you framed it with the hero's journey is so appropriate.
Thank you, Stephen. And we've talked about this a long time, so it's only expanding in our conversation. So I'm really thrilled to have you here. And next, I have Reza Sixo. Reza is an award-winning filmmaker, actor, and writer whose bold boundary-pushing work has been celebrated at Sundance, Cannes, and beyond. Renowned for his innovative approach to storytelling, he crafts films that challenge perception, blend genres, and defy expectations. He produced and co-starred in A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, an acclaimed Iranian vampire western praised by Time magazine as one of the best vampire films of all time. In addition, he has pioneered the use of AI in filmmaking, with his work featured at Tribeca, where he showcased a groundbreaking film using OpenAI's Sora. Recently, he co-founded Massive Studios, which Forbes described as a creative shop with deep expertise in generative AI. Safai's projects are a reflection of his hybrid identity and the world we live in today, where cultures, histories, and aesthetics collide to create something entirely new. Welcome, Reza. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Santiago. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's wonderful to be here with Carrie and Stephen, meet you, and Susan as well.
Thank you, Stephen. And just to put in a little bit of information, one of the things that really connected me to Reza is when I met him. You know, I just told the story about my experience with Star Wars, and Reza had a similar experience, but with another Star Wars movie. And when he said that, it was like, you know, that moment that you had me at hello, you know, it was like, yeah, we understood each other, I think.
That's right. Yeah, we really did connect on that. Very similar wavelength. You know, as you said in your bio, or, you know, hinted at, I was born in Iran, and I've lived most of my life in the US. The second time was kind of a forced exit, was during the Iranian Revolution, which, you know, in my mind is really kind of a misnomer. It was more like a civil war, a very bloody affair. And my family, so, you know, we had to leave, but, you know, while we were there, at the beginning of it, you know, it was something that all the people were involved in terms of trying to overthrow the monarchy. But then quickly, the, you know, now what is known as the Islamic Republic, those forces really wanted to take over and violently did so. And I remember, you know, I had the first time, and I loved how you described going to the cinema being such a magical experience. The first time I ever went to the cinema was when I was 2, actually, and it was before this revolution. And I was looking through a newspaper and I saw a picture, and I pointed at that picture, telling my parents I wanted to see this. And it was the original Walt Disney Robin Hood.
Okay.
And what happened was, like, you know, I said this, and then they took me to the theater. And as you can imagine, as a child, it's just profound. These larger than life figures in this magical land, and the music and the storytelling and everything, you know, I was hooked. And but I didn't get a chance to see another movie for a long time, which leads, and one of the main reasons is during this revolution, there was a very popular film in Iran. It was, you know, the hit. It was called The Deer, directed by Masoud Kimiai, and he was a terrific director, mostly, you know, like kind of on the Tarantino side, you know, mixing action with interesting things. And the star of it was the biggest star of Iran, named Behruz Vusuri, who is still revered. He lives in Northern California. And the film was playing, and during this revolution, unfortunately, it was playing in this really big cinema that there were 420 people there watching it that day. And what happened was, it's become clear that it was, the forces involved with the Islamic Republic did this, but they closed everyone in the theater and set it on fire, and everyone died. And for the longest time, that was the greatest, act of terror in the world known. My parents were busy, and my family, they were just busy trying to deal with, everything that was going on, and they weren't going to have time to really explain to a child what was going on. That's what I thought of, in terms of what would happen to going to a movie theater. Now, we were very fortunate that my parents figured out a way for us to escape during this time, and we ended up. It was a crazy time for our family because we were very, my dad was very successful, my mom was successful. We had to leave it all behind, and we moved into a trailer park in a suburb of Pittsburgh with a roommate. A major cultural shock and shift.
I imagine.
It was pretty crazy. But, as a kid, I'm, you're just kind of, I guess, resilient, and you're going to go on to the next new thing. But I made some friends, and the movie Empire Strikes Back was playing, and I was invited to go to the movie by my friends. And I don't know, what struck my parents, but I'm so glad they did. But they allowed me to go to the movie. Now, the thing that my friends didn't know, they didn't know this story I was just telling you, that what
Yeah.
happened with the film with the deer. But in the car, I was completely terrified on the way to the movie theater, thinking that I'm not going to live. Something terrible was going to happen to me. And so we get there, and the lights go down, and I'm getting even more scared. And then the magic, I didn't know anything about Star Wars or any of it. And then I got lost in this world and this story. It was incredible, obviously, because of the movie making, the storytelling, and the stuff that you're talking about, Santiago. But what was really important was when the lights came up and nothing happened to me and I left, I knew that I was free. I was free to live. I was free to enjoy art. I was free to let myself connect with others, and be among other people. So, it was a really profound moment for me. And then from that time on, I wanted anything that, that involved storytelling was, part of my DNA, I would just say at that point.
Beautiful stories, Reza. Thank you for that. And now I'm going to introduce Susan. Susan Lyon is our tutor operator, and we call our tutor operators the ghosts in the machine, because one of the things that we developed as the CFU is a tutor.
I was remember the first experience going to see that movie that you talked about. And my first daughter was only 2 at the time, so we needed a babysitter when Star Wars first came out. And it was hyped so much at the time. Everyone was so excited to go see that movie. So it was a much different experience than Riza experienced when he went to see the film. But when we got there, I don't know if y'all remember, but it was the first movie that had Dolby stereo sound, and you could actually feel the seats vibrating. It was a real experience, and I'll never forget the opening scene with the text going up into the space and
Oh,
seeing
yeah.
the big screen. It was totally different than anything we'd ever seen. And of course, we were so enthralled with the story, we went back and saw it 6 times and pages over and over, for the first couple of weeks. And we were big fans of the whole story. But it was quite a big deal in the day. I've since that time realized that I think real life is maybe even more exciting and mysterious than that movie is. So that's what I found along the way, is that it inspired us to look for bigger answers and deeper truths. So that's my story.
Awesome. Thank you for tying that into that story. I think everybody has their Star Wars story. Everybody can share that first impressions. Objects and meaning, the mythic lens. What if a simple object, a lightsaber, a dusty chest, or even a droid could hold the weight of an entire universe's meaning? In myths, objects are never just objects. They become vessels of significance, bridging the tangible and the transcendent. Jordan Peterson argues that humans instinctively assign meanings to objects, a process rooted in our myth-making psyche. A lightsaber isn't merely a weapon. It's a symbol of legacy, moral choice, and the struggle between order and chaos. This duality object as physical thing and metaphysical signifier is in the heartbeat of mythology. Why do myths across cultures imbue swords, rings, or chalices with cosmic power? Because they reflect our innate drive to turn chaos into meaning. Carl Jung took this further, proposing that certain symbol archetypes reside in humanity's collective unconsciousness. Remember this word, collective unconsciousness, because we'll be unpacking this throughout all the different sections that we do today and in later podcasts. They tap into universal patterns, the hero's sword, the mother's vessel, the trickster's tool. Myths weaponize these archetypes to make abstract truths feel real. But here's the twist. Does the object create the meaning, or does the meaning create the object? When Rey hesitates to take Luke's lightsaber, she's not rejecting a tool, she's wrestling with her destiny. Now I apply this to Star Wars. The Jedi Order downfall begins when they treated lightsabers as mere weapons, not symbols of their covenant with the Force. They lost meaning. Similarly, Snoke's Starkiller Base, a planet weaponized into machine, embodies modernity's mythic crisis, reducing sacred symbols to disposable tools. Peter warns that degrading mythic meaning leads to nihilism. And Star Wars shows that alternative. So tell me, and this is whomever wants to participate first, what are the objects in your lives that hold hidden myths? Great.
Sure. It's a beautiful topic, and as you say, there's a lot to unpack. I mean, I want to answer your question first, and at some point, just kind of talk about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
larger context of it, because I think there's so much, because underneath it all is, how do we really seek meaning? What is meaning? How do we connect with what it means to live, right? Is kind of how I interpret it. But the objects in my life, um, I would have to say, that have a lot of meaning are things from my childhood, actually. And I'll preface it with this, because and I'll, get into the specific objects, but during the lockdown and the pandemic, my eldest daughter was 8 years old at the time. And I believe one of the gifts of children is that we get to kind of relive our childhood, and for better or for worse. And in this instance, because school had gone on Zoom and people were doing school remotely, I was able to be present for, something maybe I wouldn't normally be. And she was doing our family tree. She was presenting that, and she was going through her Iranian side. And I was standing in the kitchen observing this from afar, really interested. And I started to spark to a memory that I had actually, I guess, completely suppressed, of when I was 8. And it was a very short memory. I was sitting in the classroom, and when this revolution in Iran took place, one of the first things they did was to separate the boys and the girls in the classroom. So these soldiers, marched into the classroom I was in, and my best friend was this girl, and they grabbed her. And as they were pulling her out, she was crying, "Reza, help me, help me." And I'm holding onto her hand, not knowing what to do, totally helpless. And that was this flash. And it, spooked me.
Yeah.
And it started this progression of memories, actually, that were much more violent and much more bloody. Some, things, again, that no child should see. And I started to, like, physically get these intense pressure on my head, where my body would completely shut down. And if I was lucky enough to get to my wife in time to tell her what was happening, I might have a little bit of feelings, and I would be okay for a little bit, but it just continually got worse. Then, when I didn't know what was going on, I thought I was going crazy. And my wife had a really good description for it, which was, when she'd see it, she'd say, "Reza, you're flooding." And when the things started to first open up, we took a family road trip down to San Diego, and I was driving, and she noticed that thing happening to me, "Reza, you're flooding." And I said, "Yeah, why don't you drive?" And I was just trying to sleep. The kids were just being kids. I made a loud sound in the back. I got up very angry, and was loud. And I apologized. We pulled over, we walked around, and then we drove back to the hotel. And I just said, "Look, I can't go out. You guys go out to eat. I'm going to wait here at the hotel." And then the only way I can describe this is, if you perceive the world, let's say, through a window, um, that window, it wasn't a window, like a wall was shutting. So there was just this little bit of narrow light that I could look through. And I found myself waking up from what I would call a sort of blackout. I had my phone in my hand, and I guess I had pressed missed calls, and I heard the voice of a friend of mine who's a Vietnam veteran, actually.
Okay.
"Reza, what's going on? What, hello, hello?" And I woke up, and I was on the roof of the hotel, ready to jump. Now,
Wow.
I told him, what was happening, and he immediately knew. He said, "You're suffering from PTSD. You have severe trauma." And as soon as he said that, I melted. I've never cried like that in my life. The truth, like, just hit, and everything
Yeah.
melted away. So I called a friend of mine who'd had a very horrific childhood, is this incredible person. And I said, "This happened. What do I do?" And she said, you need to go to this person who will help carve it out of you. And it was a very specific type of trauma therapy. But what that led me to really get in touch with little Reza, who I'm an actor, I'm a storyteller, I'm a writer, but it seemed completely ridiculous for me still to be like, I have to develop this relationship with, how's this going to go? And when I was willing to do it, because I was desperate, but I ended up, forming this relationship, and I saw, he was just this like scared little boy in this dark corner sitting there, afraid. And as we formed this communication and, getting to know him is what basically freed me from this. And it was an amazing 2.5 years of my life, this journey. But through that, these objects that you're talking about that are filled with meaning, and, one of them was a teddy bear, that I'd had. And those objects really represented, it wasn't even representing, it's what they were, was like
Yeah.
part of the childhood that was lost or glossed over in terms of, but there was a safety, and also what I was saying, before, in terms of what an 8-year-old should do and be able to do.
Yeah.
And so, part of my journey has been actually to get those same objects that I didn't and have them now, with me. And so another one is actually a picture of little Reza, that I'll look at sometimes, and we just connect on this really deep level. And I just let him know, that I'm here, I love him, he's very safe. And I can't tell you how freeing this experience has been for me. But I share this also because I've found that there are a lot of people suffering from similar things, but are afraid to kind of talk about this out loud. So, in case any of the listeners are going something, I'm always available to chat more about this process. But those are the objects that come to mind.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Riz. And it's really important how, what you're saying, it's that you kind of build stories, and there was this story of this little boy that you didn't want to see because it's a horror story. It wasn't a something good, but you had to, and it's sometimes that, and I understand what you mean. Sometimes you have to see that horror movie in order to kill that monster, in order to not kill, but maybe that monster loses its power, in a way. It's to kind of get that power out of it. So yeah, I can truly understand what you mean.
The frightened child run the show,
Exactly.
because that's what was happening.
Now that you mentioned that, I remember when I was around 8 years old, I was always very scared at night, and my parents never knew how to, I always went to my parents' bed, and I was that kind of kid. And suddenly my dad's youngest brother, who, tragically died when he was 20, and this, a couple of years later than this happened. But I remember he was there, he was probably about 16, 17, and he's like, "Why are you scared? What's this?" And I'm scared of the monster. He said, "Don't worry about it. If any monster comes, I'll kick his butt." That, that gave me such safety. If my parents would have ever said, if any monster, acknowledge that the monsters exist, if any monster comes, we'll take care of it, and not disregarding me. So that really stood with me, that
It's beautiful because I link it to what you were sharing about the kicking butt that you really enjoyed and appreciated, in the Star Wars. And you can see a link there, your brother was there ready to kick some butt.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Reza. Anybody else that wants to share? Stephen, Carrie, Susan?
Sure, I'll share. And I really appreciate, Reza, your deep dive and your connection to cinema through terror. I was a teacher at Ojai Valley School a little after that happened, and the owner of that theater's children came to the school, and I was their counselor. I related to them as the two girls who liked to sit in the front row of the theater anytime we went to see Star Wars. It all connected in that way. But yeah, horrific times. And, that's the fuel, isn't it? That directs us to share solutions for our own child and for those in pain throughout the world. So it's really awesome. I'd like to go back to Star Wars and George Lucas. I was at USC when George Lucas and the gang were there, and I was a freshman, sophomore when he was a graduate student doing THX 1138 4EB. And that in 1968, that year, when he did that film with all of these Navy Signal Corps guys, we sat down in a theater and we'd seen all the films. I watched every one of his films because I would check them out. I was the one who handed out equipment to the filmmakers at USC Cinema when it was just military army barracks, basically. I would hand out his films and the other films made there, and his films were just immaculate, beautiful. Everybody liked him. He was an odd character, very skinny, with a big pompadour type hairdo, like he thought he was Elvis Presley or something. Just an odd egg. And when we sat down and watched THX 1134EB, we knew the Earth had just changed. We knew that cinema had just changed. It was remarkable. And one of the things that happened that year was 2001: A Space Odyssey came out at the same time. And I remember Caleb Deschanel coming up and just describing what it was like to be in the theater, in the Cinerama theater, seeing that with some of his friends. And of course, I was very intrigued because Cinerama was my favorite format. And he was just exuding this altered state of awareness that he'd gotten into. Well, what is that thing that was informing us back there in 1968? It was this Cinerama experience of this very abstract film that had one key item in it, and that was the monolith. And that monolith was informing everything in the film and the audience ultimately, because the monolith was the screen we were watching, which is I just saw it the other day at the Turner Classic Movies Film Festival with Keir Dullea, and he looked better than he looks at the end of the film. It was a great character, but it is so awesome how Kubrick laid that out. And he didn't really, Arthur C. Clarke didn't quite even know what he was doing, but Kubrick clearly knew what he was doing. And he was laying out initially, right from the beginning, the alignment of the Earth with the moon and the sun. We were invited into this experience, and that was the opening credits. And after that, it lands with the ape people turning into humans and introducing them to the concept that they can use a tool. They can create tools, and there's something powerful with tools to the extent they can control a water hole. And that informs those beings. And then the next leap, of course, is on the moon, that informs modern era that there's something beyond the moon that's informing intelligence, and then off to Jupiter moon. And, all hell breaks loose because of AI. And then ultimately back into this now transcendent, it leads the audience into a transcendent beyond words, and lands them into this sort of a odd lit up French hotel room, it appears, and where each step, the observer, Keir Dullea, Dave, is now watching himself die. And yet he isn't dying, because there comes the monolith again, and it introduces him to his next ultimate star child life, which was amazing, in Cinerama. And so that device, I think, also was informing George Lucas, who was just getting into this THX world of escaping a labyrinth of insanity, like Godard's Alphaville, just running, his character runs out into the sun, into the light. And all of that is that he's informed. The characters that are in Star Wars and the Death Star are informed by those scenes in THX. So he was growing his case that there's something bigger when you go to the light. So the lightsaber I see as a connection even to the monolith. And the lightsaber to me is a tool, not only for defense, but it has psionic and it has telekinesis powers that you can draw it to you, and it's physical, and you can definitely destroy that which is not good and that which is blocking the light, with intense light. And what is that light? Back to 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's the big screen. It's our dream world that we share together and project on walls.
Pretty nice. That's a very nice analogy, Stephen, and the way that you see it with the monolith in 2001. Thanks for sharing.
I do have something from our tutor about associating memories and meanings with objects. So
Yeah.
would you like to hear what it has to say?
Yes, please do so.
Okay, I asked, why do we associate? And it says the association of memories and meanings with particular objects stems from the way we, as conscious beings, navigate the interplay between the material and spiritual dimensions of life. Objects often serve as physical representations or symbols of experiences, relationships, and emotions that are otherwise intangible. This is deeply tied to our ability to assign significance to the world around us, a reflection of our innate desire to find meaning and connection in our lives. When we experience something deeply personal or transformative, the objects present during those moments can become imbued with the essence of that experience. For example, a photograph may capture not just an image, but the emotions, relationships, and context of a particular time, allowing us to revisit that memory whenever we see it. Similarly, a gift from a loved one carries the weight of their affection and thoughtfulness, making the object a tangible link to the relationship itself. These act as anchors, grounding our memories in the physical world and allowing us to revisit them with clarity and emotional resonance. This phenomenon also reflects the way humans use symbols to express and preserve meaning. Objects become more than their material composition, they transform into vessels of significance. For example, is not merely a piece of metal, but a profound symbol of love and commitment and shared purpose. That's why we do it, so we can recall the intensity of the experience or the meaning.
Thank you. Perfect and spot on, Susan. Thank you for doing that research.
Well, I was just thinking as Susan was reading about the wedding ring and about the cross, and there's much there to talk about for future conversation, I suppose, and even concentric circles, the heart, the peace sign. So yes, there's much worldwide that we can all recognize and that we can have conversations about.
Mythical archetypes and the mind. Mythical archetypes are the deep structures of the mind that shape how we experience, interpret, and create meaning in the world. Carl Jung introduced the concept of collective unconsciousness, a universal layer of the psyche that all humans share regardless of culture or upbringing. Within this collective unconsciousness resides archetypes, universal symbols, patterns, and roles such as the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, and the trickster, who surface in our dreams, stories, and myths. These archetypes are not learned from experience, but are innate, inherited templates guiding how we perceive ourselves and others and how we respond to challenges of life. Jung observed that these archetypes manifest in myths and folklores across vastly different cultures, explaining why so many societies independently produce similar stories and symbols. For example, the hero's journey, the wise mentor, and the battle with darkness are motifs that appear everywhere from ancient Greek epics to modern films like Star Wars. According to Jung, myths and the projections of these archetypes giving form to the unconscious patterns within the mind and allowing individuals and societies to grapple with the universal human experiences. And this process is not static. Archetypes can overlap, combine, and adapt as they are expressed throughout different cultural lenses. The influence of archetypes on the mind is profound. They organize and inform our thoughts, behaviors, and even our dreams. On a personal level, engaging with archetypal, this is always a complicated word, imagery can help individuals achieve psychological integration and growth, a process Jung called individuation, another big word. On a collective level, shared archetypes in myth and art create a sense of unity and continuity across generations and cultures. By recognizing these deep-rooted patterns, we not only better understand ourselves, but also the stories that bind humanity together, reminding us that mythic mind is not just a relic of the past, but a living force shaping our present and future. So think of this. Think about stories, movies, or even dreams that have resonated with you deep. Which mythical archetypes, the hero, the mentor, the shadow, the trickster, do you see reflected in your own life or your world around you? How might recognizing these patterns help you better understand yourself and your own journey?
Significantly, the most important part of a dream is the nightmare, the shock. When the shock happens, there is a message. And that's the message of the conscious being that you are, attempting to get through the unconscious being that you mostly are and connect to the inner self. So the shock is from the shadow, typically, and it's created by the archetype that we create. We put it on different characters that we view during the day through our lives. They become archetypes and we project them onto that screen. So
Okay.
we are accepting archetypes from media, archetypes from books, archetypes from our families, all of those. Like Santiago, your uncle was an archetype that
Yep,
would
exactly.
go and kick ass on the monsters. That is an archetype. So I love those characters. My take now is, yeah, there are teachers, and they are the ones we have to figure out, especially with the dark archetypes. What is the message they're providing? They're trying to tell us something. Our unconscious is trying to communicate into our higher mind, and they're trying to say, wake up, wake yourself up. And I'm shocking you, so you will wake up. And so you have to find the good message that the dark force is trying to describe to you.
Yeah, I think that's key.
And that transmutation is what the magic is. That brings us into our connection alignment with our inner self that is connected to the universe, to the frequencies of life. So that's a powerful thing. My favorite archetype, though, is the phoenix. And that's like, Riza, you've experienced it dramatically. I've experienced it many times in my life where everything is stripped away and there's nothing left. And what do?
Let me just remind everybody that maybe do not know about the phoenix. What is the phoenix? The phoenix is a bird that once it gets old and it gets, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, once it's spent, I believe, let's use that word, it bursts into this fire, this, transformative fire that rejuvenates it, not gives it back, it transcends it. It destroys the past and it begins with a new one. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, you go as far as you can and you die. And then from the ashes, the phoenix is born.
The phoenix is reborn.
And the death is the ego death, obviously. Or it can be, varieties of having everything stripped away from you, which is another form of dying.
Well, you just had that experience, Stephen, recently of fire consuming everything. So you can relate to that.
Yeah, January 7th. Yeah. Our house was turned to ashes, and all the books and all the art,
everything,
gone.
So how was that experience? I know that you're bringing something else, but I think that experience with you, and we were talking about fire, I think that's important. Yeah. What did that do to you?
Well, it wasn't my first rodeo with that sort of loss, but it was for my grandson, who had built beautiful Lego things. He had built the owl, of Harry Potter's owl, and book and wand, and Hogwarts, and all of these amazing Lego builds, which he did in relationship to his mom and I building these events every year, this pumpkin patch festival, Mr. Bones. So he would mirror that as he grew up from being a little child, when he just couldn't wait to start doing something with his hands. And then he was building this fantastic thing. So he's 14 and he just filled the house with them. Well, he went to school and never saw them again. And so that affected me as a grandfather. I really felt the pain as much as I could and knew he had lost it all. But his comment when he's talking with his mother and he says, well, Mom, you really wanted to get rid of a lot of stuff. So that probably, this took care of it, trying to support her in her pain. And that was endearing. But the most profound thing he said was that this must be the time in my life where I grow, where I have something painful and I'm there for my friends and others who have gone through it. That's the phoenix. That's the twist. That's where the darkness is teaching us something. The dark force that you were,
yeah, exactly. That's the lesson. And I think this is very important because, I mean, life is this. Life is not just, just fun and games. Life is this dark force, this transcending through this dark force. So it's very important, and this goes back to, everything. If we look at Viktor Frankl and how he survived the concentration camps, it was trying to give meaning. And if you can give meaning to being in that horrible situation, something similar to what Reza lived, I mean, not as close, but being in that, maybe that totalitarian, regime that you feel just powerless over. If you don't take the lesson, if you don't learn from it, if you don't make meaning, and this is beautiful what you're saying about your grandson, giving him meaning, even if he's so young, and you feeling his pain. But I think that soothed your pain and his mother's pain, your daughter's pain, for him. And I think that event, brought you guys together, reflected, even if it was a fire that took, the material away, it brought the unity and the spiritual in you guys.
Yes. Yes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. And remarkably too, when those events happen, people open their hearts, and you're the recipient of that energy, and it's phenomenal. Suddenly whoever is around you suddenly knows that you lost everything, and they just drop their agenda, drop their, planning and egos, and to say, is there anything I can do to help you?
Yeah.
Strangers.
Well, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Stephen. That was, it just reminds me of when disaster strikes, or when, someone dies, and you're there, everything else melts away, and what's really important, comes to the top, and for that moment, everything that's important, and it just, when you were sharing, it just really made me think that there's a moment in life where you realize the stories that moved you, they weren't just entertainment, right? They were maps, really, right? I mean, as a kid, I can say I didn't have the language, for archetypes, but I felt them. I felt them in my heart. I felt them somewhere really deep, and I could almost feel the ache of the outsider, right, or the pull of the wanderer, or as Stephen's saying, this kind of terrifying, almost seduction of the shadow, right, and later I actually then, like all of us, came to understand that, these weren't just characters in a movie, right? They were actually parts of me, trying to make themselves be known, which I'm really grateful for. I think that's actually what myth does best. It gives shape to something that is formless. It takes your inner chaos, and it just says, look, there's a pattern here, right? You're not the the first to feel this loss, or to be this angry, or longing, right? The story's already been told, and it's not in a mean way, right? It's more like it's comforting. It's the story is still being told through you, right?
It's relatable in a way, right? You
It's
can
what?
relate. You can relate to it. That's the
Exactly.
word. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, look, the first time I saw a character break down under their own weight, or their own mask, right? It was someone who looked powerful and controlled, but then was completely shattered, right?
Yeah.
It makes you feel exposed, but it also feels like someone's kind of opened a window into your own mind and your own soul, and so I don't know, I feel like that's really when I started to understand that archetypes weren't just symbols of, they're not symbols of who we should be, right? But they're actually a glimpse of who we already are, right? In little fragments in these stories. And that's very comforting. That's very settling. It's very, you feel part of the world. And that's, I mean, really what I felt when, I wouldn't be able to express it this way,
Yeah,
but
totally.
that's what I felt when I watched Empire Strikes Back.
When and when you touch into something which is very important, you can relate, find that there is the same stories within, the other people, and that's brotherhood. That's when you can say, we're brothers, and we live the same, bleed the same, we cry the same. It's that. That's
And
beautiful.
we can recognize both the gods and the monsters in ourselves. you know.
Exactly. Of course. And that's a tricky part. And, touching back on the dark force that Stephen said, sometimes you have to embody that dark force. And, one of the things that I've come to realize, 45 years into my life is that you can't really kill your dark side. There's a dark side there. You have to kind of embrace it, control it. I see it. And this is an archetype, it's like when you're slaying a dragon, you can go and rescue the princess and you can slay the dragon, but you can do it in even better. You can use that dragon, you can subdue that dragon and use that dragon to your favor. Ride that dragon and use that dragon against your enemy. So imagine that it's not you're not just disposing of the dragon, but you're going to be using that force that was so powerful and maybe that would eat you alive to get your purpose. And I think that as long as your purpose is divinely aligned and reaches a higher values, then you're going to be able to dominate that dragon and be able to use it in your favor. I don't know.
That's right. That's right. That's so beautiful. I think it's like both the gods and the monsters, you realize they both have something to teach you.
I noticed a common thread between the stories that Stephen and Riza were telling were basically a spiritual truth I think we mostly know as becoming like a little child. In other words, the openness and the innocence of the child is where we go back to really connect with our true self and our meaning and our connection to spirit and the divine. And I put into the tutor about when you ask the question, are there stories that bind mankind together? And it came up with pretty much the similar thing that you guys were talking about, that yes, there are stories that make us all feel united and together. And one of them is creation. Another one is the universal story of the hero, the journey of the hero or quest for transformation. And it says this archetypal narrative appears in myths and legends and spiritual teachings across the world and throughout history. So it must be in our DNA that we're looking for the hero.
It is.
And
It is.
and it says it speaks to the individual, but it also makes the individual realize that they belong to everyone. They belong to humanity because we all share the same story. Anyway, I thought that was cool that it came up with that.
I think it's spot on what archetypes are, and this collective consciousness that we talk about. And I want to evolve that collective consciousness concept into the mind, the divine mind, the mastermind, because I believe that our minds are all connected to this, the central mind, and that we draw inspiration from this divine mind. So I think this is what we're talking about, just points into that direction. You want to share something, Carrie?
Yes, thank you. I thought that was so interesting, Susan. I was just thinking about some of the lessons that I've learned and read about from various research, and that as these challenges happen on such a small scale or even a large scale, it's really necessary almost for us to be able to determine how to react to them, for us to use our free will and to use what morals we've been taught to determine how to overcoming all of these issues that are presented to us, this dark side, and to be able to use that lightsaber, to be able to use that light, to be able to grasp the divine from within, to be able to overcome whatever challenges is presented to us.
Let's talk about the hero's journey, and it doesn't matter if it's ancient, if it's modern, and we all live through this, okay? So we have 3 acts, There's the departure, which is separation, initiation, and return. The journey follows 12 key stages arranged in a circular path, and we're going to be using Star Wars to point us out in this direction, right? So we begin in the ordinary world. Before the adventure begins, we see the hero in their normal life, unaware of the journey ahead. The example, or the classic example, is Luke Skywalker on Tatooine, living as a farm boy. And then we have the call to adventure, a challenge, a threat, or opportunity disrupts the hero's ordinary life. Example, Obi-Wan tells Luke about the Force and asks him to join the rebellion. There's something that's a message before there. There's something that kind of gets the message out, or that you can get a hint of what's going to happen. And I love the scene. It's when Luke, before the end of that day when they get the droids, and he looks on the to the horizon, and his uncle is saying, you're gonna have to stay for another season and help me with the farm before you can go and be a pilot. And he looks to the horizon, and you see the two suns setting, and that's when we hear, Luke's theme. And in the end, Skywalker, you're always looking at the distance. That's what we can hear. That's the call to adventure is almost there. And what happens afterwards? That's the refusal to the call. We always refuse the call. The hero hesitates, doubts themselves, or rejects the call out of fear or obligation. Am I worthy? Is this really for me? The example is Luke initially refuses to leave Tatooine, saying he has responsibilities at home. But then we meet the mentor, a wise figure. A mentor appears to guide, train, or inspire the hero. So here we see Obi-Wan Kenobi giving Luke his father's lightsaber and teaching him about the Force. I mean, that's where we start to see that transformation. And then we get to the crossing of the threshold. And it's the end of Act 1 of departure. The hero fully commits to the adventure, leaving their familiar world behind. The example is Luke leaves Tatooine with Han Solo and enters the world of the rebellion. Then we move into test, allies, and enemies. This is the start of Act 2, the initiation. The hero faces obstacles, makes allies, and encounters enemies, preparing for the main challenge. So this is just like preparing. This is the training. And the example is Luke, Han, and Leia escape the Death Star, but Obi-Wan is killed, and there's a loss in this process. Suddenly you have this mentor, and you feel real comfortable, and you kind of go forward because you have this mentor that kind of shows you the way, and suddenly the mentor goes away. And you're thrown into this situation. You have to not redo, but you have to see who's there now. And now who's left with Luke? His buddy, maybe an atheist, maybe somebody that does not believe in the Force, which is Han. And then you have the princess, and he has to do with that. And of course, the two droids, which are very important. Then we have the approach to the inmost cave. And this is sort of what we're talking about, the dark force. The hero reaches a critical place, often a literal or figurative cave, where they prepare for the ultimate ordeal. The example is the Rebel Alliance plans the attack on the Death Star. The ordeal, the supreme challenge. The hero faces their greatest fear or crisis, often experiencing a symbolic death and rebirth. The example is Luke joins the final battle against the Empire, risking everything. And imagine this, before that time, Luke was a nobody. Suddenly there's the princess that was saved and comes along with this, this contrabandist, this pirate, and this farm boy. And suddenly they give this farm boy a ship, nobody knowing what's going to happen. And then the reward, which is seizing the sword. An overcoming ordeal, the hero gains a reward, wisdom or power that will help them in their journey. The example is Luke successfully destroys the Death Star. And we can hear throughout this ordeal the voice of Obi-Wan always guiding him, always showing this is the way. And then once he destroys the Death Star, he gets this reward. We get the road back, which is the start of Act 3, the return. Once we get to the climax, to the pinnacle, now it's the resolution. And that's how we see in stories as well. We get going to the third act, and we're resolving this. We got the challenge, we got the wisdom, we got the whatever it is that is going to bring the return and bring conclusion to that situation. So the sort of act turn is the hero begins the journey home, but there still may be obstacle. And the example is the Empire retaliates, setting the stage for future challenges. And I think that here is a very crucial step for anybody that, gains wisdom. How are you going to use that wisdom? Are you going to use it for good? Are you going to use it for evil? Are you going to be exploiting people? Or are you going to be sharing with people? And this is important because once somebody gets to power, and if you do not dominate your ego and really put your ego aside, you can be drunk on power, and that can be, worse than the bad guy. It's always in stories that we see that the hero becomes a worse bad guy than the worst guy. Then we get the resurrection. A final test pushes the hero to fully transform, proving that they have changed. Example, in Return of the Jedi, Luke faces Vader and the Emperor, fully embracing his role as a Jedi. And not only that, we see in the latter saga of Star Wars that he even fails as a master. He fails Kylo Ren, in that time Ben Solo, thinking that he's going to be bad, he's going to turn evil, and trying to, take that decision for him, and causing all that happened, which is turning him to the dark side and him becoming Kylo Ren. So in a way, Luke did fail as a master. And we see that, probably when we were young, we didn't realize that, but we realized it afterwards, that he did fail. And then we have the return to the elixir. The hero returns home bringing newfound wisdom, strength, or an actual reward to share. The example is Luke restores peace to the galaxy and carries on the Jedi legacy. But if we look at the main story, the story of Luke, we can say that that has the return to the elixir. So this is the hero's journey, and I want to just add this to the myth as foundation for personal religion. Let me just read this so we can but I wanted to add this to this breakdown of the hero's quest. All right, myth as foundations of personal religion. Myth serves as the deep foundation upon which personal religion is built, offering individuals a narrative framework to interpret their lives and experiences. Myths are not merely ancient stories about gods or heroes. They are sacred tales that reflect and reinforce the community's worldview, providing explanations for existence, morality, and the mysteries of life. Through myth, individuals find models of behavior, sources of inspiration, and sense of belonging to something greater than themselves. The archetypal patterns and symbols within myths become internalized, shaping how a person perceives right and wrong, purpose, and destiny. As these myths are embraced and personalized, they give rise to what can be called personal religion, a lived internalized faith that draws on the values, metaphors, and rituals of myth. This process is evident across cultures and history. Myths justify rituals, explain the origins of sacred practices, and offer a fixed model for moral and religious behavior. For example, the myth of a hero's journey or a divine creation story is not just a tale of to be recited, but a map for an individual's spiritual growth and struggle. You know, a lot of scholars have noticed that myth is not an obstacle to religion, but it's an essential foundation, providing the existential meaning and emotional resonance that personal religion requires. This intimate relationship between myth and personal religion means that even in the modern secular age, the values and symbols of ancient myths continue to shape individual belief systems where through traditional religious practice or more individualized spiritual paths, people seek guidance, comfort, and identity in the timeless patterns of myth. And this is important. I'm going to turn this to you guys. And this is how I treat my kids. You know, I realize that, you know, my kids, when they're 5, when they're 6, even 10, almost to when, you know, cultures see that they come of age, which is 13, 15 years of age, you can't really talk to them about God. I mean, it's a very high concept, and it's really, you know, not practical for them, you know, to try to explain God to them. But if you tell them these stories, if you tell them the stories of heroes, if you tell them the stories of fairy tales, you know, about all of these magical creatures and the magical beings that are around us, we fill their minds with all these archetypes and all these possibilities and all these mythical stories that, you know, really create their foundations for spirituality and therefore for their personal relationship with God. And I think that's you know, basic and fundamental, that we share with our children these stories, and that we never in an instant think that this is not transcending in their minds. And I open this to you guys. Anybody that wants to share?
I'll go ahead and share. I feel like that really arouses their curiosity, like you're saying. It's just all those myths and stories and legends arouses their curiosity, and hopefully they will seek answers and they will seek solutions, and something will stick with them, and they'll ask questions to a trusted adult like their parent or a teacher. So absolutely, yeah, it's hard to evoke spirituality in children, but to get their curiosity going is so important.
And how do you do it, Carrie? Because especially, I mean, you tailor your stories to young children. I mean, how can you bring, and especially, you know, stories, and we were talking about this the other day, how can you tell a child about, you know, the crucifixion and, you know, these dark forces or these dark times? How can you explain that to them?
Well, I think you need characters to help with that, to interest them. You need a character they can relate to, something they think is charming and cute, or even if it's an evil, you know. So my protagonist is a pink fantasy butterfly, but she has a friend that she can talk to. So I think by bringing these legends and these heroes and these superheroes. That's why the superheroes are so important and so popular, rather, in films and such. But that helps to get them thinking and arouse their curiosity and ask questions.
No, thank you so much for that. There was so much wonderful things, and I really agree with, I could really hear what Carrie was saying. I think one thing that, and you touched on this, Santiago, I think that's one thing that's really interesting in relation to children. I have children as well. Is that the hero's journey is like often, I think misunderstood as like a straight climb, right? Like you're just going to leave and you're going to conquer everything and you're going to come back a champion and that's it, right? But that's not what it is. It's a circle, as you said. I love that it begins with leaving what and it actually ends with bringing something back. And I think often that can be in relation to what we're talking about, a deeper understanding of yourself. So, I think for children, I mean, everyone, but I think for children, that circular path is really vital. It teaches you that like uncertainty is not failure, that being afraid or making mistakes or when you're feeling lost, that's not the end, it's actually the middle, right? And
Yeah.
that the darkest part of the story usually comes right before the transformation, right? And that's really powerful because it gives them a framework for their own struggles that they're going to have. And I think I said this before, but I just think it continues to say that you are in the story. You're not outside of it. You are becoming someone, right? Even when it feels like you might be breaking or things aren't going. So, because I think perfection is something that is very harmful to us all, and it's not achievable. And this somehow is attainable, and because it's not even attainable, it's just something that you can do. It's a path you can go on. It's a journey that everybody can take, right? It's not like the ticket isn't too expensive, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think I see it in a way that you can always pay the ticket. I mean, some tickets, some are you can pay a cheap ticket. I mean, and then some are, but you have to be willing to pay that price. But you're always going to have that money, and maybe that's the path. You have to accrue that money in order to pay that ticket. I don't know, because you can overcome everything, and I think that's what you mean. It's not price to the ticket because anything is attainable. I think that's the word that you say it. Everything is attainable if you put yourself to it. And I think if you have faith, faith plays a lot here. When you go into that cave and you say, okay, this is what I put in here and what I put into the soil. So I'm hoping, and that's the way I see it. It's like when you codify a seed, that, this seed is going to bring this type of tree or this type of flower.
Right.
Well, what are you putting? What are you sowing into the seed, into the soil?
Right.
What is your intention? What is your attitude? And if you know that it's true, and if at least sincere, that something good is going to come out of it. But if you know that you're just sowing evil or you're just sowing something bad, a bad tree is going to come out of that.
Exactly. And and it's like you made me think of this, but the hero doesn't just save themselves, right? It's because of this new way that you come back of looking, you actually end up, whether you want to or not, you end up bringing healing to the world, that you actually left behind, which I think
Awesome.
is, as profound as it gets.
Thank you, Reza. That's beautiful what you just said.
I would like to say just real quickly in response to what Riza said is telling stories are memorable more than even personal teaching or whatever for the children and the next generation. I think it's so important to pass on the ideals to the next generations through stories because we have a way of putting truth into the stories that is memorable, but also the children can relate to how to handle certain situations, how to overcome fear and be transformed. And so I put into the tutor, how do we face greatest fear or challenge or crisis? And it said, facing our greatest fears, crises, or challenges is one of the most profound tests of the human spirit. And it is in these moments that we are often called to grow in ways we could not have imagined. At the heart of the process is the recognition that fear and adversity while deeply unsettling, are also opportunities for transformation. They invite us to confront the limitations of our understanding, to deepen our trust in the divine, and to discover the strength and resilience that lie within us. And it goes on to talk about how to find the stillness within from the divine, and then to not avoid or deny when there's a problem, but to have courage. And it doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means acting in spite of it.
In spite.
God and the higher power guiding us through the storm. But that was really beautiful what it came up with.
Beautiful. It's acting in spite of the fear, not avoiding the fear. Awesome.
The idea of myth is extraordinary for me. I remember being in a philosophy class at USC and learning about oral tradition, and that the myths were spread by the poets, and that was all in memory, that they could memorize the Iliad and the Odyssey through the rhythm of their poetry, because there was no writing. And each step, and that was storytelling then. And then storytelling evolved into the printed word. And in a great explosion, the Renaissance occurred. And then storytelling, telling the same stories, the hero's journey, because that's our journey. It's irrevocable. This is our journey because the world is a scary place. And we have to confront the fear. We have no choice as human beings from those early times to the present. And now we've moved on beyond the printed word into the visual cinematic communication that's spread through the instantaneous, near instantaneous digital reality that we live in, cyber reality that it pervades us, this magical world that's coming to us through frequency exchanges that I cannot explain and couldn't explain it when it was a cathode ray tube with a gravity antenna. It's unbelievable. It turns into an image with sound, and we look at it and mesmerize, magnetize, provided with a new reality, a new dream reality, a new pattern. So we're all living the hero's journey, and to share the hero's journey in a way that others can grow from it is, I think, an extraordinary opportunity and gift and purpose, and gives me meaning just to try and figure out how to connect with that other person and share the accrued wisdom that one gets after failing many times, and understanding that you rise above it, you learn from it, you grow a new aspect of your soul, and in effect, you connect with your own higher self, this divine self that we are, that we have access to, and that is the real journey. And the ultimate hero's journey to me, of course, well, it started with Milarepa. I love that story. If any of you know the Milarepa story, where that hero's journey is, he just wanted to be a good boy, and his mother was pissed off because his father died, and they were wealthy. The Milarepa family was very wealthy, but then when his father died, the uncle and aunt came in and took the estate and enslaved he and his mother. And his mother said, "You got to go learn how to deal with this," and he learned black magic. And then he came back and he killed them by creating a sonic explosion in the temple that reverberated not the temple, but the house, and it collapsed this stone house on the relatives. And of course, he turned into a demon. He had to deal with that, and he had to go on and learn how to deal with it. And he went through a lot of torturous searching, and he found Marpa the translator, and Marpa said, "No, I'm not going to take you on as a student to transmute your evil." And although Marpa then had him build all these stone houses, and Marpa's wife decided she couldn't put up with him banging on the door of Milarepa all the time, trying to get Marpa to teach him how to transmute his black magic. And so she forced Marpa to train him. And so Milarepa learns the mantra, goes off into the Himalayas, sits in a cave for a decade drinking nettle tea and just aligning himself with the deity of the universe. And in doing that, with each breath, he transmuted the evil, and he goes outside and he levitates and flies over his community and freaks out everybody. There now he's the green demon. Milarepa, just sitting there, gathered all of these people around him. They came up to see who this man is now. And just his presence was enough to transform them, heal them. And he just wrote poetry until eventually one of the relatives, a son of the dead uncle, came and poisoned Milarepa. And Milarepa took the poison, thanked him, and then he just lifted off and ascended. That was my first, wow, that's a hero I would like to emulate. That goes further. Then we look at Jesus as and to me, the ultimate hero's journey.
Of course.
The most extraordinary. And Jesus is still affecting us, and he's maligned, and he's revered, and he's dogmatically used as almost a weapon on people. There's so many versions of Jesus, yet the essence of Jesus' story is the ultimate hero's journey. That's what gives me faith and understanding that I can move through life. Yeah, I was born Christian, but I didn't like church. And I realized after my trials and tribulations, there was a real North Star there. And I appreciate that there's so much great revelatory information that comes through, resonating with the hero's journey on that level.
Yeah. Well, it's our journey. Hero's journey is everybody's journey. And like you said, it's really the biggest one is Jesus, and we can all emulate that life, not only the divine, but the human. I think that the human Jesus is the most important, which we will be learning a lot in this podcast. Our time has come to an end. It's been really, really, really rewarding having these conversations, having this topic, which I think is fundamental to humanity, the mythical story and mythical archetypes, and how we shape our reality and how we view the world and how we give meaning and eventually, establish that personal relationship with God. We basically ignite that divine spark within us, that divine within. So I want to thank all of you, Reza, Stephen, and my two lovely ladies, Susan and Carrie. Thank you for being here, for all your contributions. It was a pleasure. Just follow us. Remember to follow us. Remember to check our comments. Check all the information. We're going to put the different tools that we generated in the Center for Unity, so you can check them out. The tutor, if you want to learn about Jesus as well, we have another app called Discover Jesus that we're also going to share. So please check all this out, share, and see you next time. I'm Santiago Kneeland, and this is The Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. Take care and carpe diem.